Proletarian Blues by Roderick Long, posted on c4ss.org on September 9, 2012, as a part of the Left Libertarian Classics category. The following article is written by Roderick T. Long and published on the Austro-Athenian Empire, November 25, 2006. I've finally gotten around to reading Barbara Ehrenreich's Nickel and Dimed, a book I've seldom seen libertarians mention without a sneer, but in fact, it is a mostly excellent book. Ehrenreich went undercover to document the lives of the working poor and the Kafkaesque maze of obstacles they face: the grindingly low wages, the desperate scramble to make ends meet, the perpetual uncertainty, the surreal, pseudoscientific job application process, the arbitrary and humiliating petty chicken-shit tyrannies of employers, the techniques of intimidation and normalization, the mandatory time wasting, the indifference to employee health, the unpredictably changing work schedules, making it impossible to hold a second job, etc., etc. None of this was news to me. I've lived the life she describes, and she captures it quite well, but it might be well news to those on the right who heroize the managerial class and imagine that the main causes of poverty are laziness and welfare. Of course, the book has its flaws. One is the author's attitude towards her, quote, real working-class colleagues, which sometimes struck me as rather patronizing. The other, and this is what invokes the libertarian sneers, is her economically clueless, hopelessly statist diagnosis and proposed solutions. She thinks the problems she talks about are caused by, quote, the market, an entity concerning whose operations she has some rather strange ideas. For example, she thinks the reason housing prices are so high is that both the rich and the poor need housing, and so the prevailing prices are determined by the budgets of the rich. She notes in passing that this effect doesn't seem to apply to food prices, even though both the rich and the poor presumably need food too, but she seems blissfully untroubled by the inconsistency in her theories. And her suggestions for fixing the problem include a higher minimum wage, a, quote, remedy that would throw many of the objects of her compassion out of work, and more public assistance. But Ehrenreich's misguided diagnoses and prescriptions occupy at most a tenth of the book. The bulk of the book is devoted to a description of the problems, and there's nothing sneer-worthy about that. And libertarians will win few supporters so long as they continue to give the impression of regarding the problems Ehrenreich describes as unimportant or non-existent. If you're desperately ill, and physician A offers a snake oil remedy, while physician B merely snaps, "Stop whining," and offers nothing, physician A will win every time. So if Ehrenreich's solutions are the wrong ones, what are the right ones? Here I would name two. First, eliminate state intervention, which predictably works to benefit the politically connected, not the poor. As I like to say, libertarianism is the proletarian revolution. Without all the taxes, fees, licenses, and regulations that disproportionately burden the poor, it would be much easier for them to start their own businesses rather than working for others. As for those who do still work for others, in the dynamically expanding economy that a rollback of state violence would bring, employers would have to compete much more vigorously for workers, thus making it harder for employers to treat workers like crap. Economic growth would also make the higher wages possible, while competition would make those higher wages necessary. There would be other benefits as well. For example, Ehrenreich complains about the transportation costs borne by the working poor as a result of suburbanization and economic segregation, but she never wonders whether zoning laws, highway subsidies, and other such government policies have anything to do with those problems. Second, build worker solidarity. On the one hand, this means formal organization, including unionization, but I'm not talking about the prevailing model of, quote, business unions, unquote, conspiring to exclude lower wage workers and jockeying for partnership with the corporate/government elite, but real unions, the old-fashioned kind, committed to the working class and not just union members, and interested in worker autonomy, not government patronage. See Paul Buell's Taking Care of Business for a history of how pseudo-unions crowded out real ones with government help. On the other hand, it means helping to build a broader culture of workers standing up for one another and refusing to submit to humiliating treatment. These two solutions are, of course, complementary. In an expanded economy, greater competition among employers and fewer legal restrictions on workers makes building solidarity easier, while at the same time increased solidarity can and should be part of a political movement fighting the state. That's the left libertarian movement I'd like to see, and people keep telling me it doesn't exist. Good Lord, I know it doesn't exist. Why else would I be urging that it be brought into existence? Of course, I'm also told that it can't exist. Libertarians tell me it won't work because leftists don't care enough about liberty. Leftists tell me it won't work because libertarians don't care enough about the poor and oppressed. In short, each side insists that it's the other side that won't play along. Now, the answer to this is that some will and have, and some won't, but that we should do what we can to increase the number who will. So here's a general challenge. If you're a libertarian who thinks leftists don't care about liberty, why not become a leftist who cares about liberty? That way there will be one more. Or, if you're a leftist who thinks libertarians don't care about the poor and oppressed, Why don't you become a libertarian who cares about the poor and oppressed? Once again, that way, there will be one more. And in both cases, there will also be one fewer libertarian of the kind that alienates leftists by dismissing their concerns, and likewise, one fewer leftist of the kind that alienates libertarians by dismissing their concerns. This brings me to another issue I've been meaning to blog about. F.A. Hayek famously argued that the concept of social justice was meaningless, because society is not a moral agent that could be guilty of injustice. But the concept of social justice need not imply that, quote, society in the abstract is responsible for anything. To condemn social justice is simply to say that there are systematic patterns of exploitation and oppression in society, and that individuals are responsible either for unjustifiably contributing to the situation, or unjustifiably failing to combat it, or both. But, the libertarian may object, are these problems really issues of justice? Well, Aristotle distinguishes between, quote, general justice on the one hand and, quote, special or, quote, particular justice on the other. General justice is concerned with interpersonal moral claims in general. It's the entire interpersonal dimension of morality, quote, the whole of virtue in relation to another, end quote. Special justice is concerned with a particular sort of moral claim, the sort that nowadays we would call rights. Aristotle lists what one is owed in virtue of being a citizen under the Constitution, what one is owed as a result of a contractual agreement, and what one is owed by a wrongdoer as a result of having been a victim of a legal injury, as examples of special justice. Special justice obviously corresponds more or less to the realm of libertarian rights, while general justice corresponds to interpersonal morality more generally. Where libertarians most crucially depart from Aristotle is in regards only to special justice as legitimately enforceable, whereas Aristotle also regarded parts, not all, of general justice as legitimately enforceable. Still, even Aristotle agreed that some aspects of general justice, generosity for example, are not properly enforceable, and that special justice was especially the concern of law. Now, it's often assumed that libertarians can properly have no use for left-wing concepts of, quote, economic justice and, quote, social justice, but many of the concerns that left-wingers treat under these heads are, directly or indirectly, questions of libertarian rights, since many of the disadvantages that burden the poor or women or minorities are indeed the result of systematic violence, definitely including, though not necessarily limited to, state violence. So many issues of, quote, social justice can be accepted by libertarians as part of special justice. Now, it still may be true that some issues of social justice go beyond libertarian rights and so beyond special justice, but these may still properly be regarded as issues of justice if they fall under general justice. Even in cases where treating one's employers like crap violates no libertarian rights, and no one should be legally actionable, for example, it still violates interpersonal moral claims, and so may be regarded as, in this broader sense, an issue of justice. Thus, there's no reason whatever for libertarians to surrender the concept of social justice to the statist left, or to let the concept stand as an obstacle to cooperation with the not necessarily or not irretrievably statist left. You've been listening to Proletarian Blues by Roderick Long, posted on c4ss.org on September 9th, 2012, and read by Nick Ford. You've been listening to Feed 44, a project of C4SS, otherwise known as the Center for a Stateless Society. Learn more at c4ss.org. And here's a little challenge that I wouldn't recommend you taking me up on. Try to take a drink every time Roderick says the word justice in that second part.